The humble merchant Marcus Kane pushed his weathered cart through the bustling streets of New Kepler Station, the wheels creaking against the metal grating beneath his feet. The space station hummed with activity as dozens of alien species conducted their daily business. His cart carried nothing more valuable than purified water bottles, each one carefully filtered and sealed by his own hands. The Zephyrian traders barely glanced at him as he passed. Their tall, crystalline forms sparkled in the artificial light, their voices chiming like wind through glass as they negotiated prices for exotic minerals. To them, Marcus was just another human struggling to survive in the Outer Rim territories. What they didn't know was that Marcus Kane had once commanded the most feared human fleet in the galaxy. 5 years ago, he had been Admiral Kane, the architect of humanity's greatest military victories. His strategic brilliance had saved 3 entire star systems from the hegemony invasion. His name was whispered in both reverence and terror across 1,000 worlds. But that was before the incident at Proxima 7, before he had been forced to make a choice that haunted his dreams every night. Now he sold water to aliens who treated humans like second-class citizens, and he told himself it was penance enough. The morning routine was always the same. Marcus would set up his small stall in the market district, arrange his bottles in neat rows, and wait for customers. Most days, he barely earned enough credits to pay for his tiny quarters in the station's lower levels. But it was honest work, and it kept his hands busy enough to forget the weight of command that had once rested on his shoulders. A group of young Corvan soldiers swaggered past his stall, their reptilian features twisted in sneers. They knocked over several bottles with their tails, sending precious water spilling across the deck. Marcus said nothing, just knelt to clean up the mess. The soldiers laughed and moved on, pleased with their petty cruelty. As he worked, Marcus noticed a small figure watching from the shadows. A human girl, maybe 10 years old, with dirt-smudged cheeks and clothes that had seen better days. She reminded him of the children he had once sworn to protect, the ones whose faces still visited him in his nightmares. The girl approached cautiously, her eyes fixed on the water bottles. Marcus could see the thirst in her gaze, the way her cracked lips parted slightly as she stared at the clear liquid. Without hesitation, he picked up one of the undamaged bottles and held it out to her. She looked at him with wide eyes, uncertainty written across her young face. Marcus smiled gently, the same smile he had once given to his own daughter, years ago and light years away. The girl took the bottle with trembling hands, whispered a quick thank you, and disappeared back into the crowds. Marcus watched her go, feeling something stir in his chest that had been dormant for far too long. Perhaps redemption wasn't about hiding from his past, but about choosing when to let it surface again. The awakening storm. The distress signal came through the station's emergency channels at 0300 hours, piercing the artificial night with its urgent tone. Marcus jolted awake in his cramped quarters, his military training instantly alert despite years of dormancy. The automated voice echoed through the corridors. All residents report to designated safety zones. Hostile fleet approaching. This is not a drill. Marcus pulled on his clothes and joined the stream of panicked civilians flooding the corridors. Aliens of every species pushed and shoved, their fear palpable in the recycled air. Through the viewports, he could see the approaching ship's sleek, predatory vessels that he recognized immediately. The Syndicate had found New Kepler Station. The Syndicate was everything the galaxy had learned to fear. A coalition of the most ruthless species, united only by their hunger for conquest and their hatred of weakness. They had been systematically destroying human settlements for months, enslaving survivors and strip-mining entire worlds for resources. In the main plaza, Station Commander Voss, a portly Centaurian with nervous eyes, was trying to maintain order. His voice crackled through the comm system as he addressed the crowd. Please remain calm. We have sent surrender terms to the approaching fleet. They have agreed to spare civilian lives if we comply with their demands. Marcus pushed through. The crowd, his jaw clenched. He had seen what the Syndicate considered sparing civilian lives. Mass executions, forced labor camps, and worse. Commander Voss was either naive or a coward, possibly both. Near the front of the crowd, Marcus spotted the young girl from earlier. She stood alone, clutching the empty water bottle he had given her, her eyes wide with terror. The sight of her. Fear ignited something primal in his chest, a protective instinct that had been buried but never truly dead. The Syndicate ships were closing fast, their weapon systems charging with ominous energy signatures. Marcus counted at least 12 vessels, including 2 heavy cruisers that could reduce the station to debris in minutes. The station's own defenses were pathetic in comparison to outdated pulse cannons and shields that hadn't been upgraded in decades. Commander Voss continued his useless attempts at crowd control, while the station's security forces, mostly young, inexperienced officers, looked as terrified as the civilians they were supposed to protect. Marcus realized with growing certainty that no one in authority had any real plan beyond hoping the Syndicate would honor their word. The girl caught his eye and moved toward him through the crowd, instinctively seeking protection from the one person who had shown her kindness. Marcus felt the weight of her trust, the responsibility that came with it. He thought of his daughter, of the promise he had made to protect the innocent, and of the thousands of lives that hung in the balance. The first Syndicate ship had reached docking range, its massive bulk blotting out the stars. Marcus could see the boarding tubes extending, ready to disgorge their cargo of death and destruction. In minutes, the station would be overrun, and everyone aboard would face a fate worse than death. Marcus Kane, the water merchant, knelt down beside the frightened girl and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Stay close to me," he whispered, his voice carrying a tone of command that had once rallied entire fleets. "Everything is going to be all right." For the first time in 5 years, Admiral Marcus Kane began to emerge from the shadows of his self-imposed exile. The galaxy was about to remember why his name had once struck fear into the hearts of humanity's enemies. The Admiral returns the first Syndicate boarding party breached the station's docking bay with brutal efficiency. Marcus watched from the upper observation deck as 20 armored warriors poured through the airlock, their weapons already firing, into the crowd of dock workers who had been too slow to evacuate. The screams echoed through the metal corridors, a sound that transported Marcus back to a dozen battlefields. Beside him, the young girl who had told him her name was Zara pressed closer to his side. Her small hand gripped his arm with surprising strength, and he could feel her trembling. The other civilians around them were paralyzed with fear, some weeping, others praying to whatever gods they worshipped. Commander Voss's voice crackled over the intercom again. More panic now. "All civilians remain in designated areas. Do not resist. The Syndicate forces are here to restore order." Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity. The Syndicate didn't restore order, they imposed chaos and called it peace. The boarding party was moving systematically through the station, herding civilians into containment areas. Marcus could see their leader, a massive Krillian with ceremonial scars covering his exoskeleton, directing his troops with practiced brutality. The alien wore the insignia of a Syndicate war chief, meaning he had personally overseen the destruction of at least 5 worlds. "They're going to kill us all, aren't they?" Zara whispered, looking up at Marcus with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone her age. Marcus studied the tactical situation with the analytical mind that had once made him the most feared admiral in human space. The Syndicate forces were confident, maybe overconfident. They had expected easy prey and weren't prepared for serious resistance. The station's layout favored defenders who knew the terrain, and there were emergency armories scattered throughout the facility. "Not if I can help it," Marcus replied, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. He led Zara away from the main group, using maintenance corridors he had memorized during his years of wandering the station. His destination was storage, Bay 7, where he knew the station kept its emergency supplies. More importantly, it was where he had hidden something 5 years ago, a failsafe he had hoped never to use. The storage bay was dark and cluttered, filled with the detritus of 1,000 forgotten supply runs. Marcus moved to a specific crate in the far corner, one that looked identical to dozens of others, but bore a small marking that only he would recognize. Inside, wrapped in protective foam, was his old command interface, a piece of technology that could access any human military network in the galaxy. "What is that?" Zara asked, watching as Marcus activated the device with biometric scanners that recognized his fingerprints and retinal patterns. "A reminder of who I used to be," Marcus replied, his fingers dancing across the holographic displays that materialized around him. Data streams flowed past his eyes as he accessed networks he hadn't touched in years. Ship registries, personnel, files, tactical databases, all the information he needed to wage war. The interface connected to the station's communication array, and Marcus began sending coded messages to specific individuals across the galaxy. Old comrades who had served under his command, veterans who had retired to quiet lives, warriors who had been waiting for a reason to fight again. The messages were brief and used codes that only his former officers would understand. Within minutes, responses began flooding back. Confirmations, status reports, and something Marcus hadn't expected: gratitude. His old crew had been scattered to the winds after Proxima 7, but they had never forgotten their admiral or the brotherhood they had shared. The first ship to respond was the merchant vessel Steady Hand, captained by his former tactical officer, James Chun. The message was simple: "Admiral, we're already en route. Eta 40 minutes. The pack is gathering." Marcus smiled grimly. The pack, that's what they had called themselves during the war. A group of misfits and outcasts who had somehow forged themselves into the most effective fighting force in human history. They had been disbanded after Proxima 7, officially for conduct unbecoming, but unofficially because the High Command had been terrified of their effectiveness. "Are you really going to fight them?" Zara asked, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Marcus looked down at her, seeing not just one frightened child, but the thousands of innocents who would suffer if the Syndicate's expansion continued. Unchecked, the weight of command settled on his shoulders again, familiar and heavy, but no longer unbearable. "Yes," he said simply, "I'm going to fight them." The pack assembles, the Syndicate forces had taken control of the station's main areas, but Marcus knew every hidden passage and forgotten corridor from his years of wandering. He moved through the shadows with Zara close behind, making his way to the auxiliary control room, where he could coordinate the coming battle. The first ship to arrive was Chun's converted freighter, followed quickly by the assault transport Iron Will, under the command of his former Marine captain, Rosa Martinez. Within an hour, 17 ships had answered his call, not the massive fleet he had once commanded, but veteran crews flying vessels that had been upgraded with military-grade weapons and shields. Marcus established communication with his captains from the auxiliary control room, their faces appearing on holographic displays that surrounded him. These were men and women who had followed him through the fires of war, who had trusted his judgment, even when the odds seemed impossible. "Admiral," Chun's voice carried across the years like it had never been interrupted. "Orders?" Marcus studied the tactical display showing the Syndicate fleet positions. 12 heavy ships against 17 lighter vessels, normally an impossible fight. But the Syndicate wasn't expecting organized resistance, and their ships were spread out to maximize intimidation rather than defensive capability. "We hit them hard and fast," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded respect throughout human space. "Pattern Delta 7, just like at Arcturus Station. Chun, you and Martinez take the flanking positions. The rest of you follow my lead." The battle began with coordinated precision that surprised even Marcus. His captains moved their ships like extensions of his own will, executing maneuvers they had practiced 1,000 times in another life. The Syndicate fleet, caught off guard by the sudden aggression, struggled to reform their defensive positions. Marcus watched through the station's external cameras as the steady hand delivered a devastating salvo to the lead Syndicate cruiser, its shields flaring and collapsing under the concentrated fire. The Iron Will swept in behind, its marine complement preparing for boarding actions, while its weapon systems targeted the enemy's engine sections. Inside the station, the Syndicate boarding parties found themselves facing unexpected resistance. Marcus had activated the emergency protocols, sealing blast doors and flooding certain sections with stunning gas. The aliens who had expected easy prey were now trapped in a maze of hostile territory. "Zara," Marcus said, turning to the girl, who had stayed close to his side throughout the battle. "I need you to do something for me. Can you access the station's internal communication system?" The girl nodded eagerly, her fear transformed into determination. Marcus had noticed her quick intelligence and steady hand traits that reminded him of his best junior officers. He guided her through the process of accessing the comm channels, then handed her a message disk. "Broadcast this to all civilian areas," he instructed. "Tell everyone that Admiral Kane has returned, and that they should prepare for evacuation to the human ships." The message spread through the station like wildfire. Civilians who had been cowering in fear began to move with purpose, following emergency protocols that many had never expected to use. The name Admiral Kane carried weight throughout human space, and even the alien refugees knew the stories of his legendary victories. The tide of battle was turning. The Syndicate fleet, designed for overwhelming weaker opponents, found themselves outmaneuvered by crews who had learned to fight as a single organism. Marcus's tactical brilliance, combined with his captain's experience, created a symphony of destruction that the enemy couldn't counter. On the tactical display, Marcus watched as the last Syndicate cruiser attempted to retreat, its hull scarred and its weapon systems failing. The war chief's flagship was burning, its crew either dead or dying in the cold vacuum of space. The battle was won, but Marcus knew this was only the beginning. "Admiral," came Chun's voice over the comm, "the Syndicate fleet is broken. Shall we pursue?" Marcus looked at Zara, who was coordinating civilian evacuations with the competence of someone 3 times her age. He thought of all the other stations, all the other worlds that were suffering under the Syndicate's expansion. The water merchant had fulfilled his small purpose, but the galaxy needed the Admiral again. "No," he said finally. "We have bigger fish to fry. Signal all ships we're going to need more than 17 vessels for what comes next." The Empire's dawn. 3 months after the Battle of New Kepler Station, Marcus Kane stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned flagship Terran Vengeance, watching as the largest human fleet in history prepared for its final assault on the Syndicate's home worlds. What had begun as a desperate defense had evolved into something far greater, the birth of humanity's first true galactic empire. The fleet now numbered over 300 vessels, drawn from every corner of human space. Former naval officers had emerged from retirement. Merchant captains had volunteered their ships, and entire colonies had contributed their resources to the cause. The water merchants' desperate gamble had ignited a fire that was spreading across the galaxy. Zara, now wearing the uniform of a junior communications officer, approached with the latest reports. In the months since New Kepler, She had become Marcus's most trusted aide, her quick mind and steady nerves making her invaluable in coordinating the growing resistance movement. "Admiral," she said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had found her purpose. "The last of the Syndicate's strongholds has fallen. Their leadership is requesting terms for surrender." Marcus nodded, studying the tactical display that showed the complete collapse of the Syndicate's military structure. What had once been an unstoppable force of conquest was now a collection of scattered remnants, their member species already defecting to seek terms with the emerging human empire. "And the response from the Galactic Council?" he asked. "They're requesting a formal meeting to discuss humanity's new status," Zara replied with a slight smile. "Apparently, they're very interested in establishing diplomatic relations with the Terran Empire." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. For decades, the Galactic Council had treated humanity as a minor species, barely worthy of notice. Human settlements had been raided, human ships had been seized, and human lives had been considered expendable. Now, faced with a military force that had swept aside their most feared enemies, the same aliens who had once looked down on humanity were eager to negotiate. Captain Sean approached from the navigation station, his face bearing the satisfaction of a job well done. "Admiral, the fleet is ready for the final phase. All ships report ready for jump to the Syndicate home system." Marcus looked out at the assembled fleet, seeing not just ships, but the hopes and dreams of countless human worlds. The water merchant had sold his small bottles to survive, but the Admiral had given his species something far more valuable, a future among the stars, where they would never again be considered weak or expendable. "Zara," he said, turning to the young woman who had become the symbol of humanity's resilience. "Open a channel to all ships." The communication array activated, carrying his voice to every captain, every crew member, every soul who had answered the call to arms. Marcus Kane, who had once hidden from his past, now embraced the weight of command that would shape the future of human civilization. "My fellow humans," he began, his voice carrying across the void to touch the hearts of warriors who had followed him from the depths of despair to the heights of victory. "Today, we complete what we started at New Kepler Station. Today, we establish not just our right to exist among the stars, but our destiny to lead them." The fleet jumped as one, 300 ships moving in perfect synchronization toward the final battle that would establish humanity's place in the galaxy. The water merchant had given one thirsty child a drink, but the Admiral had given an entire species the galaxy itself. As the ships emerged from hyperspace around the Syndicate home world, Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had learned that redemption wasn't about hiding from your past, but about choosing when to let it serve a greater purpose. The galaxy would never again underestimate humanity, and children like Zara would grow up in a universe where their species stood proud among the stars. The Terran Empire was born not from conquest, but from the simple act of a man who chose to care for one frightened child. And in that choice, the future of human civilization had found its foundation.